Now that we've covered Andrew Jackson and some of the westward movement of the United States over time, the next logical thing to discuss is Manifest Destiny, which really means the God-given right for Americans to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean and control most of North America. A president who believed strongly in this theory was James K. Polk. This quote right here on the title slide is by John L. O'Sullivan, who was a famous journalist of the time who wrote for the Democratic Review, and the quote is, "The American claim is by the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty." O'Sullivan is backing up the idea that the United States has a God-given right to control North America. Here is James K. Polk, not a very attractive man. In the election of 1844, Americans are divided over whether the U.S. or Britain controls portions of the Oregon Territory and how much of it. Polk's campaign slogan of 54-40 or fight, which I've already mentioned in another presentation you've already watched, this appeals to the expansionists who want the territory. Rather than actually fighting over it, shortly after his inauguration, in 1846, a treaty is signed with Great Britain, and it simply extends the U.S.-Canadian border at the 49th parallel where it already had been further east. And so U.S. and British relations improve greatly after this. Here's a map showing British territory, U.S. territory. Prior to the Mexican-American War is this treaty by a couple of years, and so it is here that is still controlled by Mexico. The territory in question is this lavender purple colored Oregon country here, and this small area here colored in an aqua green is the area of dispute. This dotted line is the compromise line that simply extended the 49th parallel as the northern border of the United States. Americans are also very divided over whether or not to annex and control Texas and allow it to become a state. The history of Texas, for a period of about 9 years prior to becoming a state, it was known as the Lone Star Republic because Texans revolted against Mexico and declared independence all the way back in 1836. The famous Battle of the Alamo was General Santa Anna overwhelming and killing the Texans who had turned a church mission into a fort. Santa Anna ultimately is captured by the Texans, led by Sam Houston, and they hold him hostage until Texas is freed. So after 9 years of the Lone Star Republic, Texas applies to become a state and becomes one in 1845. Here is modern-day the Alamo, which is just outside of San Antonio, Texas. Historical site that you could visit right through today. The Mexican War, this is the much more well-studied part of James K. Polk's presidency. Causes of the war. If you look at this map, there is a disputed territory between Texas and Mexico. It originates in 1836 upon Texas independence from Mexico. This river on the southern part of this map is the Rio Grande, which in Spanish means big river. Further north, what the Mexicans thought was the border was the Nueces River. And so this lined area is a disputed area. So after annexation, there's this dispute. Once the United States claims Texas as a state, it now becomes a U.S. problem, not just a Lone Star Republic problem. And so border is claimed to be different by each side. What President Polk does to intentionally cause a war is sends troops into this disputed territory. Mexico would view this as an invasion of their sovereign territory, but Polk views it as U.S. territory. So he sends in these troops and they are immediately attacked by Mexican troops because it is considered an invasion. Polk, however, says that because of the onset of violence being Mexico firing the first shot, uses this as an excuse to invade Mexico. The war is fought with a three-pronged strategy. General Zachary Taylor occupies northern Mexico. General Winfield Scott occupies Mexico City. And General Stephen Kearny marches on California. So this is a widespread effort by James K. Polk to conquer large swaths of Mexican territory. This map here shows the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo from 1848. That is in red. It effectively ends the war with a $15 million payment from the U.S. to Mexico. $3.2 million of Mexican debt is forgiven by the United States government, so really the deal is worth $18.2 million. The Rio Grande is established as the southern border of the United States, and the U.S. gains much of northwest Mexico. You'll also notice on this map a tan section labeled the Gadsden Purchase. The Rocky Mountains come all the way down out of Utah and into Arizona and New Mexico, far enough south where this area I'm scanning over here is still very mountainous and would be very difficult to build a railroad through. This territory, much more flat, much more conducive to building a railroad. The Gadsden Purchase was made to add this small section of land. Lastly, the push west. After gaining all of this territory, what is it that's going to convince people to settle the West? The gold rush in 1849. When gold is discovered in California, people rush. You can see in this graph where the population of San Francisco in 1848, when the United States first took it over from Mexico, was a couple of thousand people. By the time 1849, 1 year later, when gold was discovered, it had grown a little bit to about 5,000. But by 1850, after the discovery of gold, 35,000 people were in San Francisco. So that is quite an increase directly tied to the gold rush. And then, of course, the Gadsden Purchase, where the U.S. pays a large sum of money for a small piece of land just to run a railroad through. And that is going to bring people to the West from the East at a much more rapid pace. That is the end of the presentation. Make sure that you take your notes and use them on the online quiz so that you can perform very well. There's no reason, if you're using your notes, that you can't get a perfect score. Thank you. See you in class.